Olive Specter is one of the most infamous Sims ever introduced to the franchise. From her string of mysteriously doomed suitors to her eerie connection with death itself, Olive has captivated fans for decades. Is she a calculated mastermind or just the unluckiest Sim in the series? Today, we're deep diving into the twisted legacy of the Specter family, unraveling their story in the order the games were released to answer that question once and for all. After each mainline game era, I'll pause to summarize their evolving story, culminating in a definitive timeline. If you haven't watched my video about the complete history of the Goths, I recommend checking it out, especially since it covers important context like timeline inconsistencies and world placements. Don't worry though, this video works perfectly as a standalone if you'd rather just jump straight into this mystery. So let's get started. We first meet the Specter family at 13 Dead End Lane, a lonely mansion tucked away in the windswept desert of Strangetown, one of the 3 neighborhoods released with The Sims 2 in 2004. But this place isn't just a home, it's a mausoleum. With stone walls, crimson drapes, and stained glass windows, it looms over a packed graveyard, eerily watched over by a single throne. It's here that we're introduced to Olive Specter and her niece, Mynameisgonz. Olive is the eldest daughter of Peponia and Lerato Mwenda, names that mean paradise and love in Swahili and Swana respectively. The fact that 2 so warmly named individuals produce someone like Olive, well, the irony's not lost on me. Olive lives in near total isolation. Her only known relationships are with her niece and a man named Nervous Subject, curiously listed as her son despite not living with her. We'll come back to that. Through Olive's memories, we begin to uncover the shape of her life, one defined by heartbreak, betrayal, and a disturbingly high number of untimely passings. At least 20 Sims have passed away in Olive's presence, and nearly all of them are buried in her backyard. And at first glance, it might seem like a tragic string of bad luck, until you start looking a little closer. Of the 20 Sims she witnessed perish, 4 were electrocuted, 4 were unalived in fires, 4 drowned, and 6 passed away from starvation. Electrocution and fire are common causes of Sims unaliving in The Sims 2, so let's be generous and say that those might have been accidents. But starvation? That only happens when food is deliberately withheld. Regardless of the cause, even if some of these passings weren't her doing, Olive's biography leaves little room for doubt. It states Olive will stop at nothing to get what she wants and spends her time sharpening sticks. Combined with the image of her seated atop a throne that overlooks her victims, it's clear she wasn't just a witness, she was responsible. This is further evident by the fact that most of the ghosts are upset on the lot, seemingly stuck with the perpetrator for eternity. The first passing in Olive's life occurred when she was just a teenager. A pizza delivery woman named Danielle Greaves passed away from starvation in front of her. As an adult, Olive became engaged to a man named Earl E. Demise, but when he left her at the altar, something in her snapped. She went on to electrocute Earl, his brother Tim Lee Demise, and a man named Patrick Jones. What followed was a wave of fatal starvations including Seth Sadie, Melissa Sims, Jessica Abadi, and Benjamin Cho. Shortly after, Olive married a wealthy man named Rigor Mortis, whom she set on fire, ultimately inheriting his fortune. Not long after that, her own parents, Peponia and Lerato, also perished in a fire. The idea that she might have been behind the passings of her own parents is just chilling. By the time Olive became an elder, unaliving had become routine. Vicky Sims passed away from starvation, and Lila Grunt, the wife of General Buzz Grunt, was electrocuted. And once again, Olive married. This time to euthanasia, and once again, she unalived both him and his brother Lou with fire. And then something unexpected happened. Olive woohooed with the Grim Reaper. This single moment reveals everything about Olive's motivation and state of mind. She would have met Grim for the first time as a teenager during the passing of Danielle Greaves, which to be fair, we can assume was accidental. But after Earl's betrayal and her revenge-fueled act, it became clear no living man would ever compare. Her true love was the Reaper himself. From that point forward, every incident, every starvation, every fire, every electrocution wasn't just about anger or wealth, it was about seeing him again. And after the passing of Hugh and Lou, the romance fully bloomed. Olive became pregnant with Grim's child. But even pregnancy didn't slow her down. Nut Fuda and Luke Smith both perished during her pregnancy, but eventually Olive gave birth to a baby boy, Nervous Subject. For reasons unknown, social services arrived and took him away almost immediately. Shortly after, Olive met Ichabod Specter. Surprisingly, the two married, and Ichabod became the only man in Olive's life to pass away naturally. She kept his last name, a sign that perhaps for once her affection was genuine. And just like that, the unaliving stopped. The final 2 passings were her sister Willow and brother-in-law Creon Nigmos. Both drowned, something that once again could not have happened on Olive's lot. I truly believe Ichabod changed her, that her love for him brought an end to her need to seek Grim. And when Willow and Creon drowned accidentally, Olive took in their daughter Ophelia and raised her as her own. And believe it or not, that's where The Sims 2 begins. Olive is set to pass away shortly after the game begins, with the question of her inheritance going to Ophelia or Nervous serving as the main storyline. So let's learn more about Olive's heirs. Ophelia Nigmos is the daughter of Willow, Olive's sister, and Creon Nigmos. As mentioned earlier, her parents drowned when she was still a child, and she moved in with Olive just before becoming a teenager. She's close friends with Rip Grunt, whose mother, if you recall, was one of Olive's many victims, and she's currently dating Johnny Smith, the alien sim hybrid. Ophelia's bio describes her as a bit of a hypochondriac, nervous, anxious, and constantly on edge, which honestly is a little too me-coded for comfort. Her cousin, Olive's biological son, Nervous Subject, lives with the Beakers at 1 Tesla Court. And Cersei and Loki Beaker are easily two of the most disturbing townies ever added to the Sims franchise. They're mad scientists who adopted Nervous when he was just a child and have been running experiments on him ever since. The fact that they raised him from infancy and never even gave him a proper name is just so cruel. There's some debate on Nervous's age and when exactly he was adopted. At the start of the game, he's an adult just like Cersei and Loki. However, if they adopted him as a child, they would have had to have been adults at the time. So it's unclear if Loki's parents adopted him first, or if this is just another case of classic Sims developer magic. By the time we meet Nervous in The Sims 2, he's, unsurprisingly, a bit of a nervous wreck. He craves affection and validation and is constantly reaching out for connection. His only friend is Pascal Curious, who Loki hates because Pascal once tried to kiss Cersei. Over the years, fans have tried to ship Pascal and Nervous, mostly because Nervous seems to have a slight discomfort around women, and his affection-starved personality makes him cling to anyone, including Pascal. However, there's no real evidence to confirm this, but hey, it's The Sims, the lore is whatever you want it to be. Interestingly, Nervous and Ophelia don't know each other, which raises the question of how often Nervously actually interacts with Olive. Unfortunately, I'm leaning towards the answer being almost never, which means Nervous was more than likely taken away due to neglect. If you look at Nervous's family tree, you'll notice Olive is marked as his mother, but no father is listed. It's long been accepted that his father is the Grim Reaper. The shirt, the timing, the fact that Olive woohooed with the Grim Reaper right before Nervous was born, it's the biggest non-secret in The Sims. Why the developers chose not to make it canon and officially in the game is something we've never really gotten an answer to. So EA, if you're watching, let us know in the comments. Ultimately, the Specter storyline of who inherits Olive's fortune is up to the player. When she passes away, she leaves her money to whoever she has a better relationship with. As for the fate of both Nervous and Ophelia, it's revealed in one of the best games in the series, The Sims 2 on the PSP. The Sims 2 for PSP is a standalone puzzle adventure game released exclusively on the Sony PlayStation Portable in 2005. Set across 4 distinct neighborhoods in Strangetown, it might just be the most Sims game ever made. It was weird, mysterious, and honestly, kind of amazing. We run into Ophelia, now going by the surname Specter, in the eerie desert neighborhood of Dead Tree. Now, her name change isn't really a retcon, it's more of a correction. Originally, Ophelia was intended to be a Specter by birth, but shortly before The Sims 2 release, her surname was changed to Nigmos. Since then, every appearance has listed her as Ophelia Specter, suggesting she took Olive's last name after moving in with her. She now resides in the Meeting House, a converted church-turned residence that was gifted to her by her mother Willow. The implication is that this was the Nigmos family home, and that Ophelia inherited it when she came of age. Curiously, she had no idea the place was haunted, and boy is it haunted. It also seems that growing up with Olive left a mark. At one point, Ophelia admits that she can't fall asleep without the sound of a frenzied ghost. And honestly, if you were raised by Olive Specter, you'd be just as unhinged. A local merchant named Peta Florica claims that Olive actually stole the Meeting House from her family. But after a bit of investigation, it turns out that Ophelia's claim holds up. Eventually, Peta confesses that she only wanted access to the property so she could retrieve her grandfather's violin from his grave, which, you know, isn't creepy at all. Sadly, we also encounter Nervous Subject in the game, but as a ghost. As the player, you purchase Bella Goth's home, the Espiritus Estate, which includes a spectral maid named Emily Emery. Emily reveals that Nervous, desperate for money, voluntarily signed up to be a test subject for the Beakers, who kidnapped him, tortured him, and eventually electrocuted him until he was unalived. Once again proving the Beakers are the absolute worst. But this little detail finally retcons one of the longest running plot holes. Nervous wasn't adopted as a child, he chose to work for the Beakers as an adult, which clears up the age discrepancy once and for all. Emily also explains that Nervous's spirit can't move on because his girlfriend Annie doesn't know he passed away and believes he ran off with another woman. Annie works as a waitress at the Night House Saloon in Dead Tree, and Emily explained that if you retrieve Nervous's charm from his grave and give it to her, you'll help his spirit find peace. Unfortunately, this is a harder task than expected, as Annie also happens to be the Night Beast, a legendary desert monster that's been terrorizing Dead Tree. Like I said, this game is wild. Still, if you dig up Nervous's charm at the meeting house and bring it to Annie, she's genuinely relieved to learn that he didn't abandon her. And just like that, Nervous is finally able to move on from the mortal plane. Honestly, Nervous has lived the worst life imaginable. Born to a father he never knew, neglected by a mother who didn't or couldn't care for him, left to fend for himself, and just when he might have had a chance at happiness, he was tortured and unalived by mad scientists. You know, this dark story might explain the decisions made in The Sims 4, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, let's take everything we've learned and finally plot out the timeline for the Sims 2 era of the Specter family. Peponi and Lorato Mwenda, along with Zog and Hikat Nigmos, are all born in Strangetown. Peponi and Lorato eventually marry, as do Zog and Hikat. Peponi and Lorato go on to have 2 daughters, first Olive Mwenda, followed by Willow Mendwa. Around the same time, Zog and Hikat welcome a son of their own, Creon Nigmos. As a teenager, Olive witnesses the accidental passing of a pizza delivery woman named Daniel Greaves and meets the Grim Reaper for the first time. As an adult, Olive meets Early Demise and becomes engaged, only to be left at the altar. In an act of revenge, Olive unalives Earl and his brother Tim Lee Demise, coming to the realization that this is the only way for her to spend her time with her true love. Olive unalives Seth Zadie and Patrick Jones before Willow marries Creon Nigmos and moves to Dead Tree. Melissa Sims, Jessica Abadi, Benjamin Cho, and her parents Peponi and Lorato Mwenda are all later unalived by Olive, ultimately granting her ownership of 13 Dead End Lane. Olive meets and marries the wealthy Rigor Mortis. Olive then promptly unalives him and inherits his fortune. As an elder, Olive unalives Vicky Sims and Lila Grunt before meeting and marrying Euthanasia. As expected, Olive unalives both Hugh and his brother Euthanasia shortly after. Olive finally seals the deal and woohoos with the Grim Reaper, becoming pregnant in the process. While pregnant, Olive unalives Nuke Fuda and Luke Smith. Olive gives birth to Nervous Subject. Olive meets and becomes friends with Ichabod Specter. Nervous Subject is taken away by social services due to neglect. Olive falls in love and marries Ichabod Specter. Around this time, Willow gives birth to Ophelia Nigmos at Dead Tree. As a child, she becomes friends with Johnny Smith. Olive and Ichabod live a happy marriage together until Ichabod's natural passing from old age. Creon and Willow perish in an accidental drowning, and Ophelia moves in with her Aunt Olive. Ophelia starts dating Johnny Smith. Nervous, now an adult, volunteers to become a test subject for the Beakers and moves into their home. Nervous meets and becomes best friends with Pascal Curious and begins a relationship with Annie Howell. Olive passes away of natural causes and is finally reunited with her old flame, Grim. The Beakers move to Paradise Place, take Nervous with them by force, and imprison him, subjecting him to relentless experiments until his accidental passing. Annie presumes Nervous has left her and resents him. Ophelia moves to Dead Tree to live in the meeting house, where she's hounded by locals questioning her claim to the property. Nervous haunts his spiritus estate, his soul restless due to the misunderstanding with Annie. Once Annie learns the truth, Nervous's spirit moves on and the Spectre story comes to a close. So The Sims 2 really laid the groundwork for the Specters, and a lot of people actually think that's where the story ends, but there's much more to learn in The Sims 3. If you watched my video about the Goth family, you'll remember that each world in The Sims 3 exists at a different point along the broader Sims timeline, some acting as prequels, others as parallel stories, and a few taking place well after the events of The Sims 2. In the downloadable world of Midnight Hollow, released in 2013, we meet a much younger Olive Specter, and let's just say, a lot has been retconned. At 48 Beach Bend, Olive is living with her baby boy Nervous Subject in a surprisingly opulent estate. Her backyard is once again dotted with the graves of her former husbands, however Early Demise is noticeably missing, a detail confirmed by developers to be an oversight. The real twist comes from the Specter Family biography, which outright states that Olive wasn't responsible for the passings of her husband. In fact, she was supposedly so devastated by their loss that she went to confront the Grim Reaper to give him a piece of her mind, but ended up giving him a piece of her instead. This completely flips the narrative of what we saw in The Sims 2. Instead of a cold-blooded Black Widow, this version of Olive implies that Grim was the one unaliving her lovers, all to get close to her. Not only does this contradict what we know from The Sims 2, but it also introduces a major continuity issue. Nervous Subject is living with her, and Ichabod Specter has already passed away. According to Olive's memories in The Sims 2, she didn't woohoo with the Grim or give birth to Nervous until she was already an elder, and Nervous was taken away by social services before Ichabod passed away. The Midnight Hollow biography also confirms that Nervous is indeed the Grim Reaper's son, but goes a step further by claiming that Olive was never in love with Grim to begin with. None of this makes any real sense, but since The Sims 3 is canon, we're left to accept that Olive caught Grim's attention at a young age stage, and that he began unaliving everyone in her orbit to get closer to her, only to eventually lose interest. As for why Olive moved to Midnight Hollow before returning to Strangetown, we don't know for sure, but I like to believe that this was Rigor Mortis's original home, and that Olive stayed there until eventually returning to Strangetown. Also, on the topic of Nervous, he and Olive seem to have a surprisingly positive relationship in The Sims 3, which clearly implies that something happened between this era and the start of The Sims 2 that we still haven't been told. Unfortunately, neither Ophelia nor any member of the Specter, Nigmos, or Mwenda family appear elsewhere in The Sims 3. But we do need to talk about the Specters. In both the downloadable world of Lunar Lakes and the 11th expansion pack Into the Future, we're introduced to Sims with the Specter surname. If you go to the Sims wiki, it states outright that these characters are related to the Specter family. But I've looked high and low for any concrete proof that Noella or Planchette Specter are connected to the Specters we know. Frankly, beyond the similar name and skin tone, I've found nothing. This is one of those early fan assumptions that somehow became canonized by the community thanks to the Sims wiki and other forums that just went unchallenged for years. But because I'm a habitual pot stirrer, I'm gonna challenge it. Noella and Planchetta Specter are not related to the Specter family. In both instances, these characters exist at the far end of the Sims timeline, long after The Sims 2, in futures where the Goths, the Landgrabs, and the Altos still retain their original surnames. It makes no sense that every returning family kept their name, and the Specters, for some reason, dropped the O as if they were Italian immigrants at Ellis Island. Some might argue that Olive was the only one who could have carried on the Specter name, and that with her passing, the line ended. But let's not forget, The Sims 2 PSP canonized that Ophelia took the Specter name, which means she would have been fully capable of continuing her legacy. So unless a Sims guru comes forward and confirms a connection, we're gonna put Noella and Planchetta Specter aside for now. With that massive retcon out of the way, let's take everything we've learned so far and map out the timeline, now including the Sims 3 era of the Specter family. Peponi and Lorato Mwenda, along with Zog and Hikat Nigmos, are all born in Strangetown. Peponi and Lorato eventually marry, as do Zog and Hikat. Peponi and Lorato go on to have two daughters, first Olive Mwenda, followed by Willow Mendwa. Around the same time, Zog and Hikat welcome a son of their own, Creon Nigmos. As a teenager, Olive witnesses the accidental passing of a pizza delivery woman named Daniel Greaves and meets the Grim Reaper for the first time. As an adult, Olive meets Early Demise and becomes engaged, only to be left at the altar. The Grim Reaper unalives Earl and his brother Tim Lee Demise out of jealousy. The Grim Reaper unalives Seth Thady and Patrick Jones shortly before Willow marries Creon Nigmos and moves to Dead Tree. Melissa Sims, Jessica Abadi, Benjamin Cho, and her parents Peponi and Lorato Mwenda are all later unalived by the Grim Reaper, ultimately granting Olive ownership of 13 Dead End Lane. Olive meets and marries the wealthy Rigor Mortis. The Grim Reaper then promptly unalives him, and Olive inherits his fortune and home in Midnight Hollow. The Grim Reaper unalives Vicky Sims and Layla Grunt before Olive meets and marries Euthanasia. The Grim Reaper, again acting out of jealousy, unalives both Hugh and his brother Euthanasia shortly after. Olive finally seals the deal and woohoos with the Grim Reaper, becoming pregnant in the process. The Grim Reaper unalives Nut Fuda and Luke Smith. Olive gives birth to Nervous Subject. Olive meets and becomes friends with Ichabod Specter. Nervous Subject is taken away by social services due to neglect. Olive falls in love and marries Ichabod Specter. Around this time, Willow gives birth to Ophelia Nigmos at Dead Tree. As a child, she becomes friends with Johnny Smith. Olive and Ichabod live a happy marriage together until Ichabod's natural passing from old age. Olive Specter returns to Strangetown, and Nervous Subject is taken away by social services due to neglect. Creon and Willow perish in an accidental drowning, and Ophelia moves in with her Aunt Olive. Ophelia starts dating Johnny Smith. Nervous, now an adult, volunteers to become a test subject for the Beakers and moves into their home. Nervous meets and becomes best friends with Pascal Curious and begins a relationship with Annie Howell. Olive passes away of natural causes and is finally reunited with her old flame, Grim. The Beakers move to Paradise Place, take Nervous with them by force, and imprison him, subjecting him to relentless experiments until his accidental passing. Annie presumes Nervous has left her and resents him. Ophelia moves to Dead Tree to live in the meeting house, where she's hounded by locals questioning her claim to the property. Nervous haunts his spiritus estate, his soul restless due to the misunderstanding with Annie. Once Annie learns the truth, Nervous's spirit moves on and the Specter story comes to a close. And with that, we arrive at the final chapter in the history of the Specter family. To the disappointment of many, the Specters were noticeably absent when The Sims 4 launched in 2014. However, in 2019, Maxis gave longtime fans a small treat by uploading the Sims 2 versions of Olive, Ophelia, and Nervous Subject to the gallery. In this reimagining, Olive is neat, mean, non-committal, and alluring with the serial romantic aspiration. Ophelia, on the other hand, is creative, paranoid, and gregarious, sporting the world-famous celebrity aspiration. Nervous is erratic, a loner, and paranoid with the friend of the animals aspiration. His biography hints that the Beakers might have been experimenting on him due to his parentage, referencing a Project Grimm. I won't spend too much time on these versions because they aren't canon. They're more of a nostalgic nod to previous games than any serious continuation of the lore. That said, I will die on this hill. The Goth family's home in Willow Creek, Ophelia Villa, is absolutely a reference to Ophelia Specter and the meeting house from The Sims 2 on PSP. At me in the comments, I know I'm right. Some Sims 2 PSP fan in the development team absolutely did that on purpose. Now, before we jump in, let's quickly address the elephant in the room, the Sims 4 alternate timeline. As I mentioned in my Goth family video, the Sims 4 brought back familiar faces like the Goths, the Calientes, and the Landgrabs, but with altered ages, relationships, and traits that didn't align with previously established lore. This prompted former Sims 4 producer Sarah Holding to tweet that the game exists in an alternate timeline, which, as I've said before, was just a diplomatic way of saying we wanted to bring back your favorite Sims without explaining how it fits. And whether we like it or not, the Sims 4 is the present timeline. That means anything introduced here, retcons and all, takes precedence over previous canon. And just to be clear, this isn't some Sims 4 specific issue. As I've proven, Maxis has been reworking lore since the beginning. So if you're already halfway through typing, "This is why the Sims 4 sucks, blah 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 blah," relax. This is par for the course. Anyway, back to the Specters. To everyone's surprise, the Specters made a full-fledged return in 2024 with Life and Death, the 17th expansion pack for The Sims 4. In Life and Death, Olive now resides in the eerie yet picturesque village of Crow's Crossing, tucked away in the world of Ravenwood. She lives in the Specter Family manor alongside her new fiancé Lane Coffin and her son Nyan Specter. And yes, if it wasn't obvious, Nyan is Nervous Subject. According to the Life and Death developer livestream, this version of Nervous represents a pre-Beaker era, effectively retconning that his name was always Nyan until it was changed by the Beakers in The Sims 2. Like The Sims 3, I hold that The Sims 4 worlds also take place at different points of The Sims timeline, and much like Willow Creek taking place between The Sims 1 and 2, Ravenwood seems to be in around that same point in time. For what it's worth, the Specter family is what inspired this entire series. Maxis has ping-ponged their lore so many times that walking through it chronologically has been the only way to make series of the chaos, and maybe even appreciate why the Specters are one of the hardest families to track across the franchise. Anyway, back to Olive. Her Sims 4 incarnation is clearly based on her Sims 3 counterpart. Olive openly admits she misses every one of her late husbands and can't quite understand why she's had such terrible luck with love. She's noticeably reluctant to discuss her history with the Grim Reaper, further echoing the Sims 3 suggestion that their relationship was nothing more than a brief indiscretion. It's also revealed that Ichabod Specter and the entire Specter family originated in Ravenwood. Their ancient estate has since passed into Olive's hands following Ichabod's death. As with previous iterations, the manor grounds are surrounded by the graves of Olive's many husbands, each with their own darkly humorous epitaph. Olive has taken up work as a mortician, a calling she claims was inspired by the passing of her spouses. She seems genuinely smitten with her new fiancé Lane, though she does note that he exhibits some unusual behavior. Lane Coffin is the latest in Olive Specter's long line of love interests, and he's quite the character. A former musician and the sole member of a band called Withering Widdershins, Lane first met Olive at the cemetery. Later on, he reveals something far more unsettling. He had already been visiting the graves of her departed husbands for some time. You see, Lane is obsessed with the afterlife. His one singular goal is to become a ghost. And here's where things get really strange. Lane is a rare kind of sim, one whose traits actually shift once you uncover his secret. At first he's listed as good, but after he confesses to hearing voices, the trait changes to evil. He goes on to admit that he's only with Olive because people around her have a tendency to pass away suddenly, and in his mind, that's the fastest way to reach his ultimate goal. He's friends with quite a few of Ravenwood's townies, but it's surprising to find that he and Nyan dislike each other. Nyan is a teenager in The Sims 4, and unlike his previous incarnations, he shares his mother's darker skin tone. Of course, The Sims 4 uses different genetic systems, but there's also a subtle detail worth noting. In The Sims 4, the Grim Reaper is portrayed as black, so it's entirely possible that this change played a role in Nyan's updated appearance. What is officially confirmed is that Nyan, formerly Nervous Subject, is canonically the son of the Grim Reaper. He even has the Grimborn trait, a special feature granted only to Sims born directly from Grim himself. Nyan is a loner, and the one person he connected with, Pascal Curious, recently moved away and deleted his social bunny profile without warning. So understandably, he now spends most of his time hanging around with the local ghosts. He also seems to be the only one who sees Lane Coffin for who he truly is. Nyan finds him creepy, once remarking that he caught Lane patting gravestones affectionately and zoning out in front of broken TVs. Unfortunately, Nyan doesn't know the full truth about his parentage. Olive refuses to talk about Grimm and completely avoids the topic whenever Nyan brings it up. Nyan's age gives us a rough outline of Olive's movements over the years. She likely started out in Strangetown, moved to Midnight Hollow where she married Rigor Mortis and gave birth to Nyan, then relocated to Ravenwood to be with Ichabod Specter. Eventually, she returned to Strangetown to raise Ophelia, while Nyan, now a young adult, ended up in the care of the Beakers for a little extra cash. It appears the social services removal storyline from The Sims 2 has been completely retconned by the developers, and oddly enough, that might have been a correction, not a contradiction. You see, during the development of The Sims 2, Nervous was originally known as Nervous Beaker. His associations with the Specters came later, likely added later in development, with his memories quickly cobbled together to justify the connection. Even back then, The Sims 2 was already shifting the narrative of when and why Nervous ended up with the Beakers. Which just goes to show the whole neglected child storyline was probably abandoned just as quickly as it was introduced. This flew under the radar, but Ophelia Specter was actually added to the gallery with the Sims 4 Life and Death expansion pack. Now a young adult, she's apparently estranged from her Aunt Olive after an argument about the ethics of the Grim Reaper's business practices, in this case referring to the Reaper career. Like most other gallery incarnations, this version of Ophelia is not canon as the ages don't line up in the slightest. However, it's also not impossible that this could be Ophelia after the events of The Sims 2. With all of the pieces in place, we now have everything we need to lay out the final, complete history of the Specter family. Peponi and Lorato Mwenda, along with Zog and Hecate Nigmos, are all born in Strangetown. Peponi and Lorato eventually marry, as do Zog and Hecate. Peponi and Lorato go on to have 2 daughters, first Olive Mwenda, followed by Willow Mendwa. Around the same time, Zog and Hecate welcome a son of their own, Creon Nigmos. As a teenager, Olive witnesses the accidental passing of a pizza delivery woman named Daniel Greaves and meets the Grim Reaper for the first time. As an adult, Olive meets Early Demise and becomes engaged, only to be left at the altar. The Grim Reaper unalives Earl and his brother Timley Demise out of jealousy. The Grim Reaper unalives Seth Thady and Patrick Jones shortly before Willow marries Creon Nigmos and moves to Deadtree. Melissa Sims, Jessica Abadi, Benjamin Cho, and her parents Peponi and Lorato Mwenda are all later unalived by the Grim Reaper, ultimately granting Olive ownership of 13 Dead End Lane. Olive meets and marries the wealthy Rigor Mortis. The Grim Reaper then promptly unalives him and Olive inherits his fortune and home in Midnight Hollow. The Grim Reaper unalives Vicky Sims and Layla Grunt before Olive meets and marries Euthanasia. The Grim Reaper, again acting out of jealousy, unalives both Hugh and his brother Euthanasia shortly after. Olive finally seals the deal and woohoos with the Grim Reaper, becoming pregnant in the process. The Grim Reaper unalives Nut Fuda and Luke Smith. Olive gives birth to Nervous Subject. Olive meets and becomes friends with Ichabod Specter. Olive falls in love with Ichabod Specter, and after they marry, she relocates to Ravenwood to begin their life together. Around this time, Willow gives birth to Ophelia Nigmos at Deadtree. As a child, she becomes friends with Johnny Smith. Nyan meets Pascal Curious, and the two become friends until Pascal mysteriously disappears without a word. Olive and Ichabod live a happy marriage together until Ichabod's natural passing from old age. Olive meets and becomes engaged to Lane Coffin. Presumably, Lane passes away not long after. Olive Specter then returns to Strangetown, while Nervous Subject, now an adult, goes to live with the Beakers. Creon and Willow perish in an accidental drowning, and Ophelia moves in with her Aunt Olive. Ophelia starts dating Johnny Smith. Nervous reunites with Pascal Curious and soon begins a relationship with Annie Howell. Olive passes away of natural causes and is finally reunited with her old flame, Grimm. The Beakers move to Paradise Place, take Nervous with them by force and imprison him, subjecting him to relentless experiments until his accidental passing. Annie presumes Nervous has left her and resents him. Ophelia moves to Deadtree to live in the meeting house where she's hounded by locals questioning her claim to the property. Nervous haunts his spiritus estate, his soul restless due to the misunderstanding with Annie. Once Annie learns the truth, Nervous's spirit moves on and the Specter story comes to a close. And with that, the long, confusing story of the Specter family comes to an end. If you stuck around to the end again, thank you so much for taking this journey with me. I hope you found it useful in fully understanding how the lore of the Specter family really evolved and how it was shaped by design decisions throughout the years. Of course, if you disagree with some of my assertions, please let me know in the comments, and also what other sim or sim family you'd like me to do next. Having to produce this video along with my weekly shorts and working a full-time job is a lot, so if you'd like to support me continuing to make content like this, please consider signing up to my Patreon. The link is in the description, and thank you again to my Patreon supporters for everything that you do for me. It means the world. Also, if you want to watch me play The Sims and other cozy games live, consider following me on Twitch. I stream Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, and I'd love to see you there. Alright, see you guys in the next one.